Lilie James was a bright, ambitious graduate student with a promising future ahead of her. Marcus Greene was a quiet, unremarkable mechanic who lived in the same town, blending into the background of everyday life. But beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary lives, a dark obsession was brewing, one that would ultimately lead to a chilling and deadly confrontation. When Lilie vanished without a trace on an October evening, no one could have predicted the shocking connection between her and the man who would become the prime suspect in her disappearance. What happened between them that night would leave everyone questioning how well they truly knew the people around them. It was a chilly October evening when Lilie James, a bright 24-year-old graduate student at West Virginia University, disappeared without a trace. On the surface, Lilie had a picture-perfect life. She was an intelligent, independent woman, excelling in her studies and living in a cozy apartment just a few blocks from campus. Her friends often described her as someone who cherished her routine but also made time for adventures. Whether it was a quiet evening at home or a spontaneous hike through the woods, Lilie always found a way to balance the demands of graduate school with moments of peace. That evening, on October 15th, 2021, Lilie left her apartment as she often did to take one of her long walks around the neighborhood. It wasn't unusual for her to walk alone after a day of studying, especially when she needed to clear her mind. Her friends and roommates knew these walks were her way of decompressing. But on this particular evening, something felt different. She'd been quiet throughout the day, absorbed in her research, and some of her friends noticed that she seemed distracted, almost uneasy. Still, no one thought much of it. Lilie was always a bit of a deep thinker, and it was not uncommon for her to retreat into her thoughts every so often. Lilie left her apartment around 7 p.m., dressed in her usual comfortable clothes, a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. The sun was setting early, as it often did in the fall, casting a soft, golden hue across the streets of Morgantown. She waved goodbye to a roommate, mentioning she was heading out for a walk, but she didn't specify a route. As she left the building, the city around her was bustling with students finishing up their evening classes and locals wrapping up their workday. The streets, although familiar and safe, felt a little quieter that night, as though something ominous hung in the air. By the time her roommates began to worry, hours had passed and Lilie had not returned. At first, they thought she had simply gotten caught up with friends, perhaps out for a drink or still walking in the nearby park. But as midnight drew closer and there was still no sign of her, concern started to creep in. Her phone, usually full of messages and notifications, went straight to voicemail. Her social media accounts had been silent for hours. They checked her apartment again, nothing seemed amiss. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter, untouched, and her keys were still hanging by the door. The roommates called Lilie's close friends, hoping someone had heard from her. None had. They retraced the steps of her usual routes, but there was no sign of her anywhere. One of them called the police, but the initial response was calm. "She's an adult," the officer said. "She may have just decided to stay out longer than expected. We'll give it some time." But time stretched on, and the silence only deepened the mystery. By morning, the worry had turned into fear. Lilie hadn't returned to her apartment, and there was still no word from her. The police officially opened a missing persons case, but the lack of leads made it harder to act quickly. No one knew if Lilie had been kidnapped, if she had simply run away, or if something worse had happened. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone who cared about her. There were no known enemies in her life, no signs of trouble. She was a student focused on her future, someone who had no reason to just disappear. Yet, that's exactly what she had done, vanished without a trace. It would be days before anyone would begin to understand the dark undercurrents swirling around Lilie's disappearance, and it would take weeks before investigators discovered the chilling truth behind what had happened to her that fateful night. The first breakthrough in the investigation came when the police reviewed the surveillance footage from a local gas station near Lillie's apartment. The gas station was a small, unassuming place that most people drove past without a second thought, but on that particular night, its security cameras had inadvertently captured something that would become central to the case. The footage showed Lillie walking down the sidewalk, just as she had done countless times before. She moved at a leisurely pace, her shoulders relaxed as she walked down the quiet street, likely unaware that she was being watched. But it wasn't just Lillie's presence that the camera picked up, it was the figure trailing her. The man in the video was unremarkable at first glance, a dark hoodie, sunglasses, and jeans, his appearance nondescript enough to blend in with the evening crowd. Yet as the footage continued, it became clear that the man was following Lillie, staying just far enough behind her to remain inconspicuous but never straying too far. He appeared to be matching her pace, as though he was waiting for the perfect opportunity to approach her, or worse, to make his move. The police quickly released the footage to the public, hoping someone might recognize the man, or at least provide information about the strange behavior captured on tape. The response from the community was immediate, but it brought little concrete information. The man's face was obscured by his sunglasses, and the dark hoodie hid most of his physical features. Still, the footage was unsettling. To anyone who watched it, it was clear that the man wasn't just another passerby, he was intentionally following Lillie. The video sparked new theories about what had happened to her. Was this a random encounter, or had Lillie been stalked by someone with more sinister intentions? Some speculated that the man was a stranger who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Others, though, began to suspect that he might have been someone Lillie had unknowingly crossed paths with before. Regardless, the presence of this mysterious figure became the focal point of the investigation. The police began to canvass the area around the gas station, knocking on doors and asking questions. They spoke to shop owners, residents, and passers-by who might have seen anything unusual on the night Lillie went missing. One neighbor, a woman who lived in a nearby apartment complex, came forward with a chilling observation. She had been sitting in her living room when she noticed a man lingering outside Lillie's building just hours before the disappearance. He had been walking around the perimeter of the building, as if waiting for something. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but admitted it struck her as strange now that she was looking back. Investigators combed through local surveillance footage from other stores and businesses in the area, trying to piece together more of the man's movements. Slowly, they were able to track him, following his path through the city streets after he left the gas station. The trail eventually led to a quiet neighborhood just a few blocks from Lillie's apartment. It was there, at a nondescript house on the corner, that the man seemed to vanish into thin air. Despite the efforts to identify him, the man's identity remained elusive. There were no matches in any police databases, and no one came forward to say they recognized him. The only thing that seemed certain was that he had been connected to Lillie's disappearance in some way. The question was whether he was simply a passerby or something far more dangerous. For days, the investigation into the mysterious figure continued. The police scoured phone records, spoke to friends and family members, and even reached out to the public for any additional tips. As the days turned into weeks, the frustration among the investigators began to mount. Every lead seemed to go nowhere. But then, one tip from an unexpected source would push the case in a direction no one had anticipated. The turning point in the investigation came unexpectedly when a neighbor from across the street, a woman in her late 40s named Janet, stepped forward with a crucial piece of information. Janet had been living in the same apartment building as Lillie for over 5 years, and although they hadn't been close, she had seen the young graduate student on numerous occasions. Janet was known for keeping to herself, but after hearing about Lillie's disappearance, she felt a sense of guilt for not having paid closer attention to her surroundings. One morning, after hearing about the ongoing investigation in the news, Janet recalled something peculiar. About a week before Lillie's disappearance, she had noticed a strange man entering and exiting Lillie's apartment late at night. At first, Janet thought it was simply a visitor or perhaps a friend, but what stood out to her was the timing. The man's visits always occurred at odd hours well after dark, sometimes close to midnight, and sometimes when the apartment was unusually quiet. His appearances seemed sporadic, but there was a pattern to them that had caught her attention. More importantly, Janet recalled that on the night of Lillie's disappearance, she had seen the same man leaving the building. Her description of him matched the figure in the surveillance footage from the gas station, a tall man, dark clothing, and a hood pulled low over his head. However, she added one disturbing detail: she had seen the man leaving with something wrapped in a blanket, which he carried carefully, as if trying to hide it from view. The blanket was too bulky to be a simple bag, and Janet had noticed its shape. It seemed too big to be just a casual item. It made her uneasy, but she didn't think much of it at the time. When she learned of the gas station footage and the public appeal for information, Janet's unease turned into full-blown dread. She hadn't told anyone about the man's strange visits before, assuming it was harmless or perhaps a misunderstanding, but now, in the context of Lillie's disappearance, everything felt ominous. Janet came forward with her suspicions, and the police took her statement seriously. They immediately took action, revisiting Lillie's apartment to look for any clues that could corroborate Janet's account. The building's security cameras had been conveniently located to capture footage of the front entrance, and after reviewing this additional video, investigators found something chilling. The footage showed the man from the gas station entering and exiting Lillie's apartment multiple times in the days leading up to her disappearance. On several occasions, he was seen walking briskly towards the door, carrying an unmarked bag. Though the camera wasn't able to capture the full extent of the items he was carrying, the timing of his visits was unmistakably connected to the moments just before Lillie's vanishing act. The investigators began to focus their efforts on identifying this man, but he was proving elusive. They were able to confirm through the building's maintenance records that he didn't live in the complex, and his name didn't appear on any visitor logs. In fact, he wasn't registered anywhere in the building, nor had he been listed as a guest by any of the tenants. The sense of growing frustration among the team was palpable. This mysterious man was clearly someone who had gained access to Lillie's personal life in ways that others hadn't, and now he was slipping through their fingers. Then, as the investigation pressed on, a crucial detail emerged from a search of Lillie's social media accounts. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Lillie had posted a vague, somewhat cryptic message about someone she had recently met, someone who seemed overly interested in her life. The message was brief, just a passing remark to a friend that she was getting a little uncomfortable with a person she'd met at the local cafe, but she hadn't given much more detail. The conversation had been casual, and Lillie had brushed it off as nothing serious at the time. As investigators delved deeper into Lillie's interactions with this individual, they realized that the man who had been visiting her apartment was no stranger at all. He was Marcus Greene, a 32-year-old mechanic who worked at a local auto shop. He had lived in the neighborhood for a few years, but had kept a low profile. Greene was a quiet man, known to be somewhat introverted, and, according to people who had interacted with him, generally harmless. There had been no obvious red flags in his history, no history of violence or criminal behavior, at least, not until now. Marcus Greene had been stalking Lillie for months. He had been following her movements, lurking in the shadows, and perhaps even trying to subtly insert himself into her life. His obsession had been building for some time, and Lillie, unaware of his growing fixation, had simply brushed him off as just another passerby in her otherwise busy life. The police now had a face to put with the mysterious figure in the surveillance footage, and it was one that sent chills down their spines. The investigation into Marcus Greene was just beginning, but the chilling truth was already becoming apparent. The man who had been following Lillie wasn't a random stranger. He was someone who had been carefully observing her for far too long. The discovery of Marcus Greene's identity sent shockwaves through the investigation, but it also opened up more questions than answers. As soon as the police identified him as the man in the gas station footage, they delved deeper into his background. What they uncovered about Marcus was unsettling, but it also painted a picture of a man who had been hiding his dark obsession beneath a facade of normalcy for far too long. Marcus was a 32-year-old mechanic who had lived in Morgantown for the past 4 years. He worked at a local auto shop, a small, family-owned business that didn't get much attention in the busy town. People who knew him described him as quiet, polite, and generally unremarkable. He kept to himself, rarely socializing outside of work, and didn't seem to have any close friends. His coworkers considered him a little odd, but nothing about his behavior had ever raised any serious concerns. He had no criminal record, no history of violent behavior, and was known to live alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. On the surface, Marcus appeared to be an ordinary man, leading an ordinary life. However, as investigators dug deeper into Marcus's personal life, they discovered something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. His online activity revealed an unhealthy obsession with Lillie that had been growing for months, if not longer. He had created multiple fake social media profiles, all with the sole purpose of monitoring her. Under the guise of harmless curiosity, Marcus had been watching Lillie's every move. He liked her photos, commented on her posts, and even interacted with some of her friends under false identities. To Lillie, he seemed like just another face in the crowd, a random person who might occasionally cross her online path. But to Marcus, she had become an object of fixation. One of the most disturbing revelations was the discovery of photos Marcus had taken of Lillie without her knowledge. He had been stalking her for months, taking pictures from hidden locations. These were not candid shots or accidental photographs. They were carefully composed, often taken from a distance, sometimes through the windows of her apartment or while she was walking on campus. There was no doubt that Marcus had been watching her, learning her patterns, her routines, and her habits. The photos were kept on his phone, along with notes about her daily life, what time she left for class, when she usually went for her walks, where she liked to go for coffee. He had become so absorbed in this fantasy world that he believed he was a part of her life, even though she had never once acknowledged his existence. Despite his growing obsession, Marcus had been careful to keep his distance, never making any overt moves toward Lillie. He had crafted a careful, almost invisible presence in her life. He would occasionally run into her in public, but always in places where he could pretend their meetings were coincidental. He would stand too close to her at the coffee shop, walk behind her on the same street, or linger in the same areas on campus. Lillie, ever polite and unaware of his intentions, had likely brushed it off as just another stranger in a busy world. However, as his obsession deepened, Marcus began to take bolder steps. He started showing up at places where he knew she would be, and he began leaving little notes for her messages that seemed harmless at first, but were charged with a disturbing sense of ownership. The notes weren't threatening at first, they were simply messages of admiration, but they became increasingly possessive over time. Marcus's messages were laced with the belief that Lillie should return his feelings, that their interactions, no matter how indirect, meant something more than just chance encounters. But Lillie had never responded to him. In fact, she had likely never even noticed him. Or if she did, she never paid him the attention he so desperately craved. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer it became that Marcus had planned his actions for some time. The surveillance footage from the gas station was a key piece in unraveling his movements, but it wasn't just about following Lillie on that night. His actions indicated a carefully orchestrated pattern of surveillance, one that he had been executing in small, seemingly inconspicuous steps. The truth was even more disturbing. Marcus had been waiting for an opportunity to act, to take his obsession beyond the realm of photos and online profiles and into something far more dangerous. When Marcus was arrested, The police found a disturbing confession on his phone. It wasn't a written statement, but a series of voice memos he had recorded. In these recordings, Marcus spoke at length about Lillie, describing in chilling detail how he had been following her, how he had studied her every move, and how he believed that she was somehow destined to be with him. In one of the more unsettling memos, Marcus revealed that he had been planning to confront Lillie, to make her see how perfect they were for each other. He had convinced himself that she was simply unaware of the connection they shared, and that if he could just get close enough, she would understand. Despite his confession, Marcus's motives remained unclear. Did he genuinely believe that Lillie would reciprocate his feelings, or was this simply the behavior of a man losing his grip on reality? Regardless of his intentions, what was undeniable was that his obsession had grown into something far more dangerous. The police now had enough evidence to link Marcus to Lillie's disappearance, and the pieces were falling into place. What happened to Lillie after that final walk remained a mystery, but Marcus's actions were becoming increasingly hard to ignore. The next phase of the investigation would focus on finding out exactly what happened the night she vanished, and whether Marcus was involved in something far more horrific than anyone had imagined. As the investigation into Marcus Greene continued to unfold, the truth about Lilie James's disappearance grew more and more chilling. While Marcus had confessed to stalking her, taking photos, and obsessively following her, the full scope of his involvement in her disappearance remained unclear. Investigators had gathered substantial evidence linking him to her life, but they still lacked conclusive proof that he had been the one to take her that night. With every passing day, the case seemed to be slipping further into a web of uncertainty, until the discovery of new forensic evidence shifted the investigation in an entirely unexpected direction. It was a break in the case that no one could have predicted. Forensic experts had been meticulously examining the scene of Lillie's apartment, hoping to find any trace of her presence. While her apartment appeared undisturbed, no signs of a struggle, no signs of forced entry, there was one detail that stood out: a small blood-stained piece of fabric tucked away in a hidden corner of the closet. It was a scrap of dark cloth, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. The fabric didn't seem to belong to Lillie, and its discovery raised immediate concerns that something far more violent had occurred in her home. Upon closer examination, investigators realized that the scrap of cloth matched the hoodie that Marcus Greene had been wearing on the night captured in the gas station footage. This was the crucial link that they had been waiting for: evidence that tied Marcus directly to the scene of Lillie's disappearance. The blood on the fabric was determined to be Lillie's, confirming that something tragic had happened in her apartment that night. It was now clear that Marcus had not just been an observer, he had been involved in something far darker than anyone had imagined. Armed with this new evidence, the police brought Marcus in for questioning once again. This time he did not deny the gravity of his involvement. When confronted with the blood-stained fabric, Marcus's demeanor shifted. He became visibly anxious, his earlier defiance crumbling into something resembling guilt. He still tried to downplay his actions, claiming that things had gotten out of hand, but the evidence was overwhelming. After hours of intense questioning, Marcus finally confessed to what had happened on the night of October 15th. His confession was chilling. According to Marcus, he had been planning to confront Lillie for some time. He had convinced himself that they were meant to be together, that his obsession with her was something she should have recognized. When he followed her that night, he had intended to simply talk to her, to express his feelings, and maybe even make her see things from his perspective. But when Lillie rejected him, something inside him snapped. In a fit of rage and desperation, Marcus had attacked her, overpowering her in her own apartment. He claimed that it was in the heat of the moment that he had made the decision to silence her forever. What followed was even more horrifying. Marcus said that he panicked after realizing what he had done. He tried to cover up his crime by cleaning up the apartment and disposing of any evidence. In his frantic attempt to erase the traces of his violence, he had stuffed Lillie's body into the trunk of his car, wrapped in a blanket. From there, he had driven her to a remote area on the outskirts of town, where he dumped her body in a shallow grave, hidden from view. Despite his confession, there were still gaps in his story. Marcus refused to say exactly where he had left Lillie's body, and the police spent weeks searching various locations, following leads based on his vague directions. But Lillie's body was never found. It was as though Marcus had taken great care to conceal her, to bury her somewhere that no one would ever think to look. It was a haunting mystery that would remain unresolved, a final cruel twist in an already tragic case. The investigation into Marcus Greene's actions led to his arrest and eventual trial, where the full extent of his crime was revealed to the public. The courtroom was filled with grief-stricken family members and friends, all of whom had been touched by Lillie's tragic fate. Despite the horrifying details of the case, there was little comfort to be found in the fact that Marcus had been convicted. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but for Lillie's family, justice felt incomplete. The pain of her loss would never go away, and the uncertainty surrounding her final moments was a burden they would carry forever. The case of Lilie James is a stark reminder of the dangers of obsession and the dark side of human nature. Marcus Greene's outward appearance as an ordinary man hid a monstrous truth, and his crimes shattered the lives of everyone who knew Lilie. Her story became a tragic example of how sometimes the people closest to us, those we may never even notice, can harbor the most terrifying secrets. The investigation into her disappearance revealed a series of chilling missteps and missed warning signs, each one pointing to a danger that no one saw coming. And even as justice was served, Lillie's family and friends were left to grapple with the horrifying reality that the person who had been watching her so closely had ultimately been the one to take her life. The search for Lilie James's body continues to this day, but the questions surrounding her final moments will likely never be answered. In the end, Marcus Greene's conviction brought a small measure of closure to the case, but it could never replace the life that was lost or ease the ache of an unanswered, unresolved tragedy